Very pleased to be presenting this live 90-minute debate featuring 4 of the top 5 Republican candidates for governor in this gubernatorial primary debate. Let's take a minute to meet the candidates who are with us now. We'll start with State Senator Greg Brophy from Ray. Good morning.
Good morning, Eli.
Secretary of State Scott Gessler from Denver. Good morning. Good morning. Steve House, the businessman from Adams County. Good morning.
Good morning, Eli.
And former Senate Minority Leader Mike Kopp.
Eli, good morning.
Good morning. Tom Tancredo was another candidate who was invited to this debate. We're disappointed that after initially indicating that he would be here with us this morning, that he's not able to do so, that he declined our invitation. But we're very pleased to be joined with our media partner, our newspaper partner, the Colorado Gazette, and editorial page member Pula Davis this morning, who will be co-moderating the debate with me. Good morning.
Thank you, Eli. We're very proud to be co-sponsors of this debate, and on behalf of the Gazette, I welcome all the candidates.
Thank you. And we're going to start this morning by getting to know the candidates. Now, for the next 90 minutes, we have a lot of different questions on a lot of different topics. So we're going to move pretty quickly through these on a range of issues, everything that the governor will have to face, everything from economics to education to energy to marijuana policy and on down the list. So we'll keep you busy this morning. We're going to try and keep most of the answers to about 45 seconds or so, sometimes shorter. Obviously, if someone takes a shot at you, you'll get to respond. But hopefully we'll have a lively, fast-moving debate this morning. I want to start by getting to know each of you a little bit, and we'll go in alphabetical order down the list, and we'll start with Greg. 45 seconds or so, just give us a little bit on why and how you got into politics in the first place.
You know, I got into politics because I felt like my part of the state needed to have more representation up at the state capitol. And it's a lot like why I'm running for governor right now. I think we need a governor for all of Colorado, someone who will listen to the people of Colorado and not the mayor of New York City. So that's why I'm running for governor, and I hope to be a governor for all of Colorado.
Thank you, Greg. Pula.
Scott, what is your proudest moment in politics?
My proudest moment in politics was after the 2012 election. I'm Colorado Secretary of State. My job includes making sure we have good elections. And for the 2012 election, we had better election integrity than ever before. We had greater turnout in Colorado's history, better than ever before. And our military and overseas turnout skyrocketed, which is something I feel very passionate about, making sure our military voters get a chance to vote. So we conducted a great election. We made promises about what we were going to do, and then we did it.
Steve House, probably the least household name of all the folks who are here. Tell us what's different about you. Tell us why you're running. Introduce yourself to the electorate.
You know, I got into this process because I'm a businessman, but it really goes back to when I grew up. I grew up on a farm in Michigan, and I had 5 brothers and sisters, and, you know, we lived by something we called the law of the farm. And the law of the farm said that you spend every dollar wisely, which I don't think we do in government today, and make sure that if something needs to be done and you're capable of doing it, that you do it. And I think I recognize the situation in 2014 that we're getting into, that it needed a governor with more of a business executive sort of experience. We've seen it be successful in other states, so I'm very, very excited to be able to run for governor, interview for the job, if you will, and look forward to the process.
Mike, you left politics a few years ago. What has brought you back into the political scene?
Shannon, my amazing wife, Shannon. Yes, I did. I left office early because my wife had a struggle with cancer that had gone just about 3 years, and she lost that battle. I needed to go be with my kids. I had the really incredible experience of having this woman, Shannon, come into my life and my family's life, and the way I like to put it is she saved my life, and I mean that sincerely. Shannon made it possible for me to pick myself up and pick my family back up, and we could again embrace the future and the opportunities that the future has for all of us. I've always been in public service. She cheered me on to get back into the fight, and so here I am in the game today, happy to be here.
Our thanks to all of you for sharing a bit about yourselves and why you're here. We're going to move on to our first topic area. Most folks seem to rate the economy, job growth as the #1 issue in this election, most elections. So we're going to spend a little bit of time on this. And Scott, I'll start with you on this one. Governor Hickenlooper touts that Colorado has moved from 40th to 4th in terms of job growth in his tenure. Republicans say that may be because fewer folks are out there actually looking for work. The question is the state's economy on the right track? And as governor, how would you work to expand the workforce?
The economy is not on the right track, and I think the governor is wrong. I think he talks about what he really means is our public sector job growth. Private sector job growth lags. And in fact, Colorado has some of the worst unemployment in the entire region. We're worse off than nearly every state that borders us. And when you look at Wyoming or North Dakota, those states are booming because of the way they've been able to safely use their oil and gas resources. And if you look at Utah or Texas, those states are just eating our lunch. What I think we need to do is stop what this governor is doing, which is trying to raise taxes on people, increase utility bills, make it harder for small businesses to create jobs, and instead champion a low tax and low regulation environment so that our small businesses and people can go out and create jobs. I think they're bursting with energy, and we need to let that free.
Cool.
Steve, what should be the governor's role in fostering economic growth?
The governor's role in helping to evolve the economy is to recognize, first of all, where our strengths are. And our strengths are clearly in energy. And when you look at job growth in the state, you know, right now, the private sector job growth is about a 1% rate of growth if you take out energy. But if you put energy in, energy's at 40%. You know, it doesn't take rocket science to figure out that that's where your focus should be. I also think sometimes Governor Hickenlooper looks at job growth and he factors in the 4% job growth that happens in the government sector. That's not where I, as governor, would focus. I would focus on giving a level of certainty to our energy partners on how they can do business in this state. Because if we give them that certainty, we could grow very rapidly. In fact, that's why I'm so optimistic about the future of Colorado.
Mike, how would you streamline government, specifically through tax reform? Give us a few examples of things that you may do as governor to make the state more efficient and to bring about job growth.
Well, it's critical that we do this work. That is why when I was still the minority leader in the state Senate, I drafted the plan called Blueprint for a Leaner Government. And I wish that John Hickenlooper would have helped me adopt that plan as a state. He didn't. He could have, but he didn't. It called for two things. One, we go through every single regulation, industry by industry, and we ask the industry leaders what we can do as a state to drive down the cost of being a regulated business in their industry. My goal as governor will be to cut that cost by 25%. 25%. So that's not just talking about cutting red tape. That is destroying the barriers that keep employers from hiring more workers and from giving raises. That's what they want to do, but they're afraid to do that because we haven't had clear, consistent leadership like that from the governor. The second component of the blueprint is we go through every single bureaucracy in state government, and we get rid of the bad ones, and we keep the good ones, and we save money.
Thank you.
Greg, how would you try to streamline government through regulatory reform? Give us a couple of examples of things you would do.
Well, first we need our regulators to actually be there to help business get going. And we need to stop adding new regulations. You know, this governor just added a new air quality regulation statewide on the oil and gas industry, which I believe is going to cost us a lot of jobs, especially on the edges of the state. We are the first state in the nation to regulate methane on oil and gas production. And there's no air quality reason to do that at all. So job number one is to stop adding to the burden that companies face. And then job number two is to become a partner with these businesses. So our Department of Natural Resources and our Department of Health, for instance, instead of telling businesses no, we'll tell them how you can get your license to get going here.
Our next question is going to be for Steve and for Mike, and it's about the budget. The state revenues are going up after several lean years, and the next governor will take office in January of 2015 with what's estimated to be the largest state budget we've ever had. Where should some of that money go? Maybe give us one or two places where you would increase funding and maybe some other places where you would cut it.
Well, even though the budget may be the highest it's ever been, if you look back at what CSU is publishing, we're actually growing at a much lower rate. In fact, 2% less a year than we have in the past, which is part of the economic question you asked earlier. So it's going to be larger in total dollars. The reality of it is we're not growing fast enough to cover the entitlements that we've taken on socially, like Medicaid expansion and some of the other things that have happened. You definitely cannot cut a budget across the board. And the reason why you can in this state is because you have education, you have security that you have to deal with, you have transportation, and you have military affairs. I would never want to cut a budget arbitrarily across the board. However, there are plenty of areas in our budget where we can be a lot more efficient. One of them would be how we collect revenue. There's plenty of opportunity to improve how we cut revenue and reduce costs.
Mike, same question to you.
Well, you asked where the money ought to go. Well, the money ought to go first and foremost to the taxpayers. That money does much more good in the private sector than it does in the hands of some government bureaucrat who wants to spend it. The government is supposed to be the servant of the people. And too many people across our state, including me, has felt that it's been reversed. You know, George Washington said that the government is force. It's not reason. It's not eloquence. So my plan calls for a 2-year process. We go through every function in state government, and we compare those functions against a set of values. Is this a program that's already met its designed outcome? Is this something that is being replicated at another level of government? Is this something the private sector could do? We'll drive down the cost of government. We'll put more money in the hands of taxpayers.
Pula.
A different question for Greg and Scott. The December Economic Outlook projects that the 2015 fiscal year will hit the Tabor revenue gap, and the state would either have to refund revenues or ask voters to approve the state retaining the funds. What would your approach be to this issue as governor?
Well, we would return the money, of course, through the refund mechanisms that are already in place. And I hope that that happens, because that means that our economy is continuing to grow. But what we really need to think about here is a little bit of what the other guys were addressing with the answer to their question. Governor Hickenlooper hasn't been properly prioritizing how we spend our tax dollars. He's been shortchanging education and our future by growing entitlements. Since he came to office, spending on education has gone down 2%, while entitlement spending has gone up 67%. That's unacceptable. We need to invest in our kids, not entitlements.
Scott, same question for you.
My answer is pretty simple. I'd return the money to the people. Money is better spent in people's pockets than it is through a complex and difficult bureaucracy. I would not ask taxpayers to vote for more taxes and vote to allow government to keep those funds. So for me, it's pretty simple. Return the money to the people, and I will cede my time to my worthy contenders here.
Let's talk about health care. It's a big chunk of the state budget, as you know, about 15%, I believe. And you may not like the Affordable Care Act, but it is the law of the land. In terms of the implementation of that at a state level, do you think it's being done well, or how would you change the way it's being implemented in the state? And we're going to start here with Mike.
Well, the first thing I would do is I'd continue the fight that I started a couple of years ago against Obamacare. I believe it is not just bad for our health care choices. I believe it's bad for our economy. And it's in so many ways everything that America is not about. We don't need the federal government telling us how to find a doctor and how to get the right insurance plan. So here we are at the state level trying to implement something that we should never be involved with. That is implementing Obamacare. So the first thing I would do is I would continue my fight against Obamacare. I'd work on creating a multi-state coalition among states across the country that feel the way I do, that states should handle our own health care policy. We can do things like take Medicaid as a block grant so that we can spend it the way that we want to instead of the way that Barack Obama wants us to.
Steve.
You know, healthcare is an interesting area because before Obamacare was put into play, we were only growing 2.1% a year. It was entirely a political move. But you know what's so exciting about healthcare right now? And I work in the healthcare field for 30 years, is that between information technology, biotechnology, and nanotechnology, we're going to be able to innovate our way into amazing new things as long as we don't stifle that innovation with too much regulation. And that's part of what the problem with Obamacare is. It's not just that it's having an effect on the insurance process, it's also stifling our ability to innovate our way out of the process. So for me, I'd roll back Medicaid expansion. I would also fight Obamacare, and I would probably offer alternatives. I think at the state level, $176 million for a website that isn't working all that well is an indication that it's not going to work.
What can the state do to lower the cost of health care? Scott.
Well, the state can do a couple things. First of all, stop wasting money on an Obamacare website that is pretty much non-functional and doesn't work. We're spending way too much money on that, and as well as the bureaucracy that supports it. We can cut our costs along those lines. Secondly, I think we should introduce more competition. You know, one of the things that states, you know, should look at, and it's harder to do now than ever before, is to allow allow Colorado residents to shop for health care in other states. Open up those markets to allow more competition and allow the free market to work. You know, unfortunately, what we have right now is a governor who's a cheerleader for Obamacare. He's a cheerleader for a broken system, and we need leadership that's going to think of new ideas, not simply double down on past failures.
Greg, would you like to answer that question too?
Sure. I think that the next governor of Colorado is going to get to pick up the pieces after Obamacare fails. And I want to put down a marker right here. I want to ask Congress, repeal Obamacare, but don't replace it with anything else. Let us do that here in Colorado. Let each of the 50 states experiment with better ways to provide health care and set up a health insurance system that fits our needs and works better than what centralized planning can do. I have a plan to do that. It's market-based. It uses technology. It's going to be more affordable and more effective, and it'll be great for Colorado.
Okay, let's go to marijuana policy now, and I believe we want to talk about the money from marijuana sales, where it's being spent right now, school construction mostly, drug awareness campaigns. Is that money being spent in the right place, or can we make better use of that money? This is a question for all of you to answer. Let's just go down the list and start with Greg in about 20 or 30 seconds.
Well, we promised the people of Colorado that we would spend $40 million, the first $40 million on school construction. I think we should do that. We also promised the people of Colorado that we would regulate marijuana like alcohol, and we're not doing that. We've created the most burdensome regulatory system ever seen by mankind, of course, here, and that's why I didn't support any of that. I want the rest of the money to come into the general fund, and we'll use it like you would any other kind of general fund dollars, prioritizing education, transportation, and public safety.
Scott.
I think I agree in that we need to keep our promises and do what the taxpayers and what we voted for. On the other hand, drug awareness policies I think are pretty important, because one of my concerns is that with legalization of marijuana is we've already seen skyrocketing usage among our middle school kids and our high school kids, and there's real health problems with that. So I think one of the things that we need to do in the state of Colorado is make sure that we mitigate and we reduce the harms that our kids are going to face with greater use of drugs.
Steve.
The marijuana law, when it was passed, there was a great concern, not only by us, but I think even by Governor Hickenlooper and others, about the impact on children getting a hold of marijuana in any form. We already know from looking at several high schools across the state that there's at least 30% more marijuana being confiscated out of high schools. We also know that the tax is going to give us somewhere around $136 million. Greg was right, the first 40 was committed to the school system, but we may very well need the rest of that money, at least early on, to make sure our children are protected. If we don't protect them, we've done nothing but bad things in this process.
Mike.
Well, I certainly agree that we need to keep our promises about the initial use of that tax money. My biggest concern is about the safety of our communities, about the safety of our roads. Even though marijuana is now legal here in the state of Colorado, we have to be absolutely vigilant about what is taking place on our roads. We just have to make sure law enforcers have all the tools that they need. And the same with our kids. I look at the kids up and down my block, and my own kids, I don't want our children to get access to it. It harms them. Science is settled. It harms them.
While we're on this topic, did any of you support Amendment 64?
Show of hands. No?
No.
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 We have a Fox 31 viewer named Peter Pepping who sent us a question. We solicited a lot of questions for this debate, and that's a pretty obvious one. Would any of you move to repeal Amendment 64 if elected governor?
No.
Scott.
I think it's worthy of consideration. That's not going to be my top priority. My top priority is getting our economy rolling.
Steve.
I wouldn't, because I also think 250,000 people need a job, and that should be our priority.
And Mike.
It's not at the top of my agenda. However, we cannot bury our heads in the sand. We have to understand the impacts to our kids, to our roads, to our safety. So if the impacts are greater than anybody expects in this new untrodden territory, then you'd have to put that issue before the voters to consider.
Is this new industry taking any kind of toll on our state's reputation across the country, possibly across the world? Greg?
Of course. Everybody's watching Colorado. That, along with all of the other things that this extreme Democratic legislature has done, we've really become the petri dish for the entire nation. What I want is to show people that we can exercise individual liberty while still protecting our children from this dangerous product.
Scott?
I'll be honest, I'm tired of hearing all the jokes about Mile High City or Rocky Mountain High. You know, and I think the problem not only is that, but you know, our governor, his response is to create these little green triangles as a new branding effort. What we need is someone who's going to focus on creating substance in Colorado, where we really are a beacon for growth and prosperity, and use that brand and use that effort to create Colorado's reputation, not let it be dominated by marijuana, and not let you know, us just sort of sit down and talk about little green triangles which don't do anything. That is not leadership.
Steve?
You know, I got to tell you a story. The day of the Super Bowl, I had prepared this speech to go forward forever. Whenever somebody brought up marijuana, I was going to talk about how great the Broncos had done in the Super Bowl and that Peyton Manning had got another championship. And so after we didn't win, you know, the question comes up, nobody wants to talk about the Broncos in the state. They all want to talk about marijuana. I do think it hurts our image. I also think that if 17, 18 other states do it, which it looks like they will soon, it'll go away. But you know what's more important? We need to be proud of the state because of what we're doing in education, what we're doing in our economy, how we produce products, how competitive we are from a government perspective. If we do that, marijuana will go away.
It has tarnished our image, absolutely. I've traveled a little bit around the country, and everybody asks you the same question. What are you doing out there? I'd also suggest that the governor, just as recently as about a week ago, the National Governors Association, I think, was right in issuing a tone of sobriety to the other governors. However, the governor, now it's a little bit too late. If the governor had issued those sentiments to the public before Amendment 64 had become law, maybe people would have thought a little bit differently about it. John Hickenlooper seems to have a habit of leading after the fact, and that doesn't help us.
One more question on this, and we'll try and get through it quickly. You're all fathers. How do you, or how will you talk to your kids about marijuana? Let's start down on this end with Mike.
Well, I start with telling my kids that I didn't use it. In fact, I've had this talk with my oldest daughter recently. She's in college now, and it's legal in the state. And so these kids in college and high school too, and I suppose younger, they feel like it's okay. If the adults can do it, it must be okay. I'll tell you what I do. I talk about the real damage that it can do to an adolescent mind. I talk about the reduction in IQ, 7, 8 points. That's what some of the recent studies show. I think it's a problem. I think it puts kids at a disadvantage in a different way than it does for older adults. That's my message to my kids.
Steve?
You know, Don and I have 6 kids between us, and the youngest is a freshman at Ohio State. None of them live in the state except for one of the middle boys, who's 26 years old now, and we don't really have to counsel him on experience with marijuana. I've never actually asked him whether or not he used it or not. But 5 of our 6 kids are beyond that point. I'm more worried about our grandchildren. We have one, and we have a second one coming in about 5 weeks. I think the good news is we're going to figure out this social experiment as we go along. I don't support the fact that any of them would smoke marijuana, and I would certainly counsel and have done my 18-year-old, but she's not the kind of person that's going to do it either. So maybe I'm a little bit naive on the conversation with the kids today because our kids are grown, and they've already made the right choices with that regard.
Scott?
So I have a 5.5-year-old and a 6-week-old little boy, a little girl and a 6-week-old little boy. And I think it's a mixture of love and discipline. You need to lead by example. First and foremost, with family, you need to lead by example. And after that, you need to, treat your children as growing beings who can think for themselves and explain to them the dangers of increased schizophrenia and lung cancer and loss of IQ and all the problems. And I think it's tough growing up as a kid today because there's just so many temptations and so many things that can go wrong. There's lots of things that are legal that are bad for kids, and you have the same discussions. You hope you instill your values in your children, that you're honest with them, and that they can turn to you for help.
And Greg?
Well, you nailed it. This is the biggest concern that all parents in Colorado should have. It's my biggest for my 12-year-old. My daughters are adults and get to make their own adult decisions. But this 12-year-old boy of mine is going to grow up in a new Colorado with a new threat to our kids. And I'm a little disgusted with the media because they're glorifying marijuana right now in Colorado, leading the news all of the time, a whole section of its own in the newspaper. And we have to combat that. And we have to be really involved with our kids' lives and make sure that they understand how dangerous it is. Now, he's a sports nut, so of course I will tell him that this will harm your ability to make great plays from shortstop position or to be that point guard that you want to be. It'll make you slower than you otherwise would be and will harm your skills on the court.
You may be onto something since we just did 3 or 4 questions on marijuana, so apologies from the media. Let's switch gears and talk about education. I imagine all of you voted against Amendment 66 last year, is that right?
Yes. Right.
Almost everyone in Colorado voted against Amendment 66.
That's a fair point. Okay, so we're going to let you all answer this question. First of all, are Colorado schools underfunded? I know that there are a lot of statistics showing that Colorado is near the bottom when it comes to state funding for K through 12 education. Is that an issue for you guys, or are there other outcomes, other avenues towards improving education outcomes beyond just raising revenues and pumping more money into the system? You'll each get to answer this. We're going to start with Scott.
Sure. I think when you look at a blend of all the funding, Colorado's in the middle of the pack. The problem is that, over time, we've spent more and more money on schools, and we've not seen any increases in performance. And to be sure, Colorado has pockets of excellence in its education system. But the fact of the matter is that almost half of our low-income kids don't even graduate high school, and we don't compete well against other industrialized countries. I think we need to focus on things like school choice. I think we need to focus on things like high standards. And one of my supporters, Bob Schaefer, former congressman, he started a high school. And for the last 3 years, it's been either the top or one of the very top performing high schools, public high schools in the entire state of Colorado. He does it for 25% less than the average public school. We can perform well. We don't have to just throw money at the system.
Steve.
Depending on how you look at it, education's benchmark for us in funding is somewhere between $1,300 per child and as much as $4,000 per child when you factor in the negative factors to it. So, the question is, if you just look generically at funding, maybe we are underfunded. But the problem with that is that benchmark is not the most important benchmark. The most important benchmark is, how do we do what the very best in the country are doing? And if you look at what the very best in the country are doing, they're moving toward online education. They're looking at technology as a way to reduce class sizes. There's a lot of things we could do. Our education system, K through 12, is not performing where it needs to be, but we also have the highest, or the third highest anyway, adult educated workforce. There's a lot of things we can do before we tackle funding at this point.
Mike.
Well, funding is important, and our education system does need to be funded. But the fact of the matter is, we put $150,000, $200,000 maybe on average in each and every single classroom. Our teachers ought to be able to teach with those resources, and they ought to be able to get superior outcomes. To me, nothing makes a bigger impact on an individual child the way that a teacher does. So in our state, we should really break the union stronghold, in my opinion, and reward good teachers by paying them more, and we should make it easier to release bad teachers who maybe are tired or they're not doing well. They're failing our kids. Nobody cares about our children as much as parents do, and we always have to keep that paramount and push for an environment of choice.
And finally, Greg.
Well, thanks for asking it. And let's first set the record straight here, because everybody thinks that Democrats love to give more money to education, don't they? But the reality is that Governor Hickenlooper, when he came into office to now, has cut general fund spending on education by 2% while growing entitlements by 67%. I will reprioritize and invest in our kids, and I have a bold plan for our education reform in Colorado. Of course, it includes choice and competition along the Front Range, but I'm also the only one running who really understands all of Colorado.
Greg, thank you. We're going to hold it right there. We're going to step away and take a break for just a moment, and we're going to hear from another one of our partners today, the Colorado Republican Party. Pleased for their help in organizing this debate. Here's a message from them. We'll be right back. And welcome back inside the Fox 31 Denver studio. Switching gears now, we're going to talk about energy. Colorado's oil and gas industry, we know it's a huge part of the economy. Severance taxes pump millions and millions of dollars into the state coffers every year. With more and more drilling expected here over the next decade, how would you balance the industry's needs with the concerns of environmentalists and homeowners who are worried about a public health risk? Let's start with the guy who drives a Prius. Greg.
You know, I've been fighting against the Democrats over-regulating the oil and gas industry, well, since we've had 2 Democratic governors now. I want our state to look more like North Dakota and Texas and less like California and New York. I get this. I've seen energy booms before. You only get one shot at this, and so we have to maximize our opportunities right now. We have the most stringent regulations already in the U.S. They're good enough. We don't need any additional. We'll roll back the ones that aren't working, but we need to maximize this energy production while we have the opportunity.
Pula.
Governor Hickenlooper has sued 2 cities that attempted to ban fracking. Is that the right move? Do you agree with that decision, or how would you control communities that want to stop fracking?
Well, I think it's important that we take into local communities' concerns, but at the same time, we need a stable regulatory system statewide, so that when people buy mineral rights or they get ready to invest in the state of Colorado, we don't suddenly change the rules on them at the last second so that they can't produce. I think the truth is that we've been doing fracking in Colorado for decades now, and it's safe. And we need a governor who's going to lead and demonstrate and show that it's safe and educate people and reduce some of these lawsuits.
Steve, this question's for you. The governor managed to get 3 big oil companies and environmentalists together to build this coalition and support these new rules regulating emissions from the industry, including mandating more increased monthly leak detection checks. Does he deserve some credit for putting that coalition together and getting these passed, or do you think that the new rules they present some issues?
You know, first of all, I'm actually in favor, and there's lots of evidence of companies being able to self-regulate. We were out at the Energy Forum this week in Grand Junction, and when you talk to people about how they view the environment, from biomass to biofuel to hydroelectric powered oil and gas, these people care about our environment. And I think a lot of it can be done from a self-regulation point of view. Methane, by the way, in my mind, is going to be a future fuel for us that we really get advantage from. The problem with that air quality standard was not the big companies. It's the very small producers in the field. Those are the ones who are going to struggle with it. So, yeah, he gets some credit, but it also is going to hurt some people at the same time.
Mike, you've been a vocal critic of the recent increase in the renewable energy standard for rural communities. To what extent should the state's energy policy encourage a long-term transition to cleaner energy sources?
Well, I think technology and pricing ought to determine the pace that we move. You know, right now the legislature and the governor, they are the ones that are deciding the winners and the losers. And you know who gets to pick up the tab for that? It's the people that go to their thermostat and they don't have any choice in the matter. It's just your everyday citizen who gets stuck with a higher bill. And now, under this new higher renewable energy standard, they're not going to get anything that they don't already have except for a higher bill. It's a problem.
Another question for all of you now. Last year's Northern Colorado secession movement came from a growing resentment in outlying parts of the state that leaders in Denver don't really represent the other rural parts of the state's interests. How would you as governor help unite Coloradans and bridge that urban-rural divide that we see? Each get about 30 seconds to answer this, and we'll start with Scott.
I would work to bridge that the same way I've done it as Secretary of State. You go out and you visit people, you talk to people, you make sure that you're respecting opinions. I mean, that's why I've been endorsed in this race by a majority of commissioners in, for example, Crowley County and Garfield County and Mesa County and Delta County and Teller County, all rural counties that recognize that they need a leader who's going to be there for them and who's going to work with them.
Steve.
I have a great fondness for the rural environment because I grew up there. I don't even like the term urban-rural divide. It should be urban-rural partnership. And when you look at the 4 things that they really fought over in the idea of secession, there are issues we can overcome. I think the governor and the legislature have to invest time and understand the rural environment is what feeds us. And they're the ones who provide us the energy that really is being produced in Colorado. We have to respect and understand the role that they play in the cities. And I just think it's an education thing. And I think it really needs to be about a partnership, not about a divide.
Like,
The fact of the matter is, our state is divided like never before, and John Hickenlooper has divided us. 11 counties in the state have actually talked about seceding from Colorado. We have increased energy standards for one part of the state, but not for the rest. These gun bills were a disaster. You know, for the governor to suggest that he can go around now and just visit other parts of the state and pay some kind of lip service is not going to get it done. The problem is not listening so much as the problem is his values. His values are out of sync with where the state is.
and Greg.
Well, isn't that the question? You know, after last legislative session, some of my neighbors got so angry, they decided they wanted a divorce from Colorado, the secession movement. And some of us got so angry, we decided to run for governor. You know, I might be a bicycle riding, Prius driving farmer. I think I'm actually the perfect guy to bring our state back together, who gets all of Colorado to be a governor for all of Colorado.
Thanks for bringing props. Pula.
Let's switch to the subject of guns. Should teachers be allowed to carry concealed weapons in schools for safety reasons? And also, what else would you do to ensure school safety? And let's start with Steve.
I think that if teachers are trained, if they have a concealed carry permit, there's no reason in the world why they shouldn't be able to carry a gun. That's the nature of a concealed carry permit to begin with. We also know that in the school shootings process, Arapahoe High School was a great example. There was security on premise, and because we had security on premise, I think we averted a much larger disaster than what it was. When you talk to sheriffs in different counties, they all believe that uniform presence is probably the right strategy, and I agree with that. I think our kids need to be safe because they're the most vulnerable people we have.
Mike?
I'll tell you the approach I favor is a combination of uniformed and plainclothes officers in our schools, school safety officers, as well as giving our districts, our school districts around the state, the authority and, frankly, the encouragement and the resources they need to arm people on the staff. The students don't need to know who they are. They shouldn't know who they are. In fact, nobody should know who they are except for a few people in the administration. So it's a concept that involves a lot of moving parts. That, I think, will work and keep our kids safe. We have to make fundamental change. We can't put up with what we've been putting up with any longer.
Greg?
Of course, a well-trained teacher should be allowed to carry concealed if that's what they want to do. You know, I've been to Dove Creek, Colorado, the first school in the state of Colorado that actually allowed teachers to carry concealed on campus, and visited with them about it. And they did it for a rational reason, because they knew they didn't have enough law enforcement officers to always be there all of the time. So God bless the sheriffs that guard our schools. I look at them with a completely different light now after what happened in Arapahoe. But a well-trained and concealed carrying teacher is also an important part of a safer school.
And Scott?
I have two little kids, and I've got a little girl who's in kindergarten. And you know, every parent's worst nightmare is someone who's going to come into a school and cause our kids harm. And we trust our teachers now to educate and protect our children. And I certainly want to make sure that they have every option available, and to make sure that my kid's going to be safe. And if we want to expand it, you know, not only talking about safety and firearms, but we ought to focus too on, you know, mental health issues to make sure that, you know, people who are mentally ill don't become a danger to themselves and to society.
Do any of you think that gun rights should be among the top 3 issues in the state of Colorado?
Well, you know, Governor Hickenlooper made gun rights one of the top 3 issues in Colorado. It shouldn't be. We should just protect our Second Amendment and then concentrate on the things that bring our state back together, like education, transportation, and public safety. But he did this. He made Colorado the gun control state, and I will liberate us.
Anyone else want to take a stab at that?
Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I think that, yeah, I think these are among the top issues. And it's not just gun rights. It's a whole approach to civil liberties. And it's a whole problem that we have with the folks in government now who are forcing an ideological agenda upon people. And even the supporters of those gun restrictions admit that it doesn't have a practical impact on stopping those types of crimes. And it drove good jobs on it. It prevents people from protecting themselves. And that's the problem we have when we've got a governor that's more than willing to hurt people's civil liberties. So it's more than just the gun issue.
For me, I think it is also somewhat as what Scott said. The larger issue here is the government doesn't trust us, whether it's gun control, health care, or other things. And so gun control becomes a priority, first of all, because the Second Amendment needs to be protected. And I think the transition from here to back to where we need to be with the Second Amendment is not that big of a leap, but we need to really look at, people think that we don't trust the government as citizens. The larger problem is they don't trust us. And as the farther they go down that path, or we allow that as voters, the bigger problems we're going to have. A change in November can fix that.
Real quick, Mike, anything?
Well, yeah, the governor did pick at this scab, and he shouldn't have. The fact of the matter is, gun ownership is an individual right under our Constitution. I grew up really under the Second Amendment. I learned at a very young age how to defend my sisters and I when my parents were away. I fought in the Army. I understand the use of guns. See, in America, you should have the right to defend yourself. You shouldn't have to hope, like some Democrats hope, that you could just find a safe place to hide if you or your loved ones are under attack.
To another controversial topic now, and that is the death penalty. Governor Hickenlooper's decision specifically to grant the temporary reprieve, indefinite reprieve to Chuck E. Cheese killer Nathan Dunlap last May. Here's what the governor said about a year ago.
Our system of capital punishment is imperfect, and there's an inherent inequity that at such a level of punishment, it really does demand perfection.
Now, when he made those remarks at the Capitol, he was basically saying it's been 15 years since the state held an execution, and that the 3 men on death row perpetrated crimes similar to those of other folks who have been sentenced to life in prison, not to death. Why should Nathan Dunlap, Sir Mario Owens, and Robert Ray die for their crimes? Greg?
Because they committed heinous murders. And Governor Hickenlooper failed his leadership test when he wouldn't take a stand with regard to the death penalty. I mean, and he told us he was in favor of the death penalty, and then he takes this kind of an action. Just have the courage of your convictions and do the right thing. Nathan Dunlap is a heinous mass murderer. He killed 4 people in cold blood. If I had been governor, we would have had an execution about 6 months ago.
Scott?
The people of the state of Colorado support the death penalty. And we support our juries and we support our judges to make the right decisions. And the governor did promise that he was going to support the death penalty. And when push came to shove, he waffled. And he wouldn't even make a decision and just kicked the can down the road. And that's not justice, and that's not fair to the families and the victims here. The fact of the matter is, we shouldn't have a governor that picks and chooses which laws he wants to enforce. We need to respect our laws and let that process go forward.
Steve?
I think that when you listen to his words, and he's talking about the system being imperfect, to come back from a justification for why we shouldn't have a death penalty and not provide clemency, even though I absolutely agree Nathan Dunlap was judged by a jury of his peers. I've sat on a jury. I understand the process very well. He should have had the death penalty applied. But how can there be a greater failure of leadership than to stand there and explain why the death penalty shouldn't be used and then not make any decision at all? I don't even know if it was legal what he did.
And Mike?
I'm sorry that the governor has put these families through this personal anguish. They've been going through appeals process after process. And every time the murderer, Nathan Dunlap, is still found guilty. The governor has an obligation to lead. There's nobody up at this podium today that would really want to make that decision. And I understand that, but you have to make that decision. You've run to serve in this office. You have an obligation to do the tough things. He should have made the decision. I would make the decision. I'd sign the execution order.
Thank you.
Let's switch to traffic, one of my favorites. About 3 weeks ago, we had massive traffic jams with people coming back from the mountains, and we have traffic jams constantly in El Paso County, here in Denver. What would you, and let's start with Scott, what would you do about it? Widen the highways. I know we have a lot of that going on, a lot of construction, mass transit, and how would you pay for it?
I saw you looking at me, so I knew you'd be asking me first. We have a budget where we've had a governor that has such bad budget priorities that our Department of Transportation can barely keep up just with basic maintenance. And I'm a supporter of public-private partnerships to be able to bring those funds in without raising taxes. But Our governor, he told Time magazine that he prefers a day when we could go back to backroom deals and sort of the smoke-filled rooms outside of public scrutiny. And you saw that happen with the US 36 corridor between Denver and Boulder, sort of a backroom deal that no one knew about, and all of a sudden a foreign company has a 50-year lease on state highways. I don't know if that was a right or wrong decision, but I knew it was done in secret, and that's not the way to do things.
Thank you. Steve.
Transportation is definitely an issue. We've gone from $1.6 billion down to $1.1 for transportation infrastructure. It has a lot to do with the change in how we drive Prius cars and things like that rob our transportation budget. The reality of it is transportation infrastructure is going to be critical if we're going to build our economy on energy and the things that we need to do. Of course, I also hate traffic. I happened to be on 25 northbound yesterday, and it was not pretty. I also think that there's tremendous technology change coming in how we drive and what we do. In the next 5 years, before the end of the decade, we'll see a combination of better transportation infrastructure and innovation.
My preference is to widen I-25 where it needs to be widened, to widen I-70 where it needs to be widened. I'm not interested in building a train through the mountains. I don't think it'll work. I don't think that's in keeping with the nature of Colorado. So I think you have to put a clear goal and agenda out there, and you figure out a way to harness the capital that you need to accomplish that. People sit in traffic for hours. They want to go enjoy the weekend and ski, and then they come back, and it's sort of spoiled when you spend 8 or 9 hours in traffic. But it's not just a quality of life issue, as important as that is. I want people to spend more time with their kids, but it also is a commerce issue. You're losing money when you make people sit in those traffic jams for hour after hour after hour. We need to drive an agenda that prioritizes transportation funding, especially on those two important corridors.
Craig.
Well, first, let's recognize that Governor Hickenlooper and the Democrats have snatched about $1.5 billion out of what would have gone into funding transportation and reprioritized it into expanding entitlements and other programs. We need to roll that negative factor back as fast as we can. And I'll take a page from Governor Owens' book. I think it's time, with the Fed holding interest rates near zero, for us to borrow against some future revenue streams and widen these highways. And I got to tell you, I do like the use of HOV and toll lanes there. If you're really in a hurry and you're willing to pay more to get there on time, that should be available to you.
Okay. This is a question of great importance in Colorado Springs and the southern part of the state. With the enormous cuts that have been proposed by Defense Secretary Chuck Hagel, how would you as governor protect the military assets we have in the state and, if possible, attract more military assets to Colorado? And we'll start with Mike.
Well, I'll say this, first of all. I've become aware of the fact that the governor is part of a delegation that goes to Washington on and off, and it's sort of a delegation that is trying to get ahead of some of the trimming that's going to take place. It's my understanding the governor has not been a forceful voice for Colorado. So you have to start with having a strong commitment to a national security, national defense, as I do. I think our commitment to Colorado Springs needs to be absolutely unquestioned. It's not just an economic engine for our state and all of the industries and all of the communities that support that, but it's also important for the defense of our nation.
Greg?
I think our world is actually getting more dangerous, not more safe. And so I think our governor needs to be a real advocate for maintaining our military strength at the level that it's at now. And then go back and tell them in D.C., Colorado's the perfect place to train. Where else are you going to have high altitude and mountains, the kind of things that you might face if you have to go back into Afghanistan or into that part of the world with this kind of a climate? We're perfect, and we need to be the messenger for that.
Scott?
To use an Army term, when it came to worries about cutting our defense industry, we had a governor who was AWOL. He did nothing to prevent those cuts. What we're seeing here is a consolidation of the defense industry. And we've got great engineering and design in Colorado. We need to make sure we attract manufacturing in as these industries consolidate. And we have, a tax that's directly targeted towards, heavy equipment, stuff that hits manufacturers right between the eyes. So we need to change our regulatory environment and our tax structure so that we encourage companies to come here when that consolidation occurs so that Colorado will continue to be a leader in aerospace.
Steve?
One of the very first things we did when I got in the race was we asked for a copy of the state's Brock plan and also other states, because when you're in business, you want to see who am I competing against. And so when we looked at Huntsville, Alabama, for example, their plan was great. In fact, the process that went on before, we actually gained pieces in that or gained business in that. We are not even submitting a reasonable plan. The plan is almost non-existent. There's technology advantages to having the military here. I love hiring people with that kind of strategic planning skill set. We need to put a plan together, and we've got a very short period of time to do it.
All right, we're covering a lot of topics here, moving along well. We're going to take another short break here, and then we're going to change things up just a little bit when we come back. Stay with us. And welcome back. I'm political reporter Eli Stokels, along with Pula Davis, editorial page member from the Colorado Springs Gazette, and we are bringing you a live 90-minute debate among 4 of the 5 leading GOP gubernatorial candidates. We're pleased to be joined by all of you. You guys are doing great. Pula and I are going to take a break and let you guys ask each other a couple of questions. You'll each get to ask somebody up there a question, a direct question, and they will have about 30 to 45 seconds to respond. Greg? Alphabetically, we'll start with you. Fire away.
Well, thank you for this opportunity. I mean, this is a great chance for Colorado to take a look at the candidates and see if they have a vision for Colorado and the ability to talk about the things that they have done here in the state of Colorado. So I would ask the Secretary of State, when 2012 started, you had a $7 million surplus in your budget. JBC tells us that your surplus will be $0 by the end of the upcoming fiscal year. What happened to the money?
Scott.
And that's true, and that's a great thing, because what we did is we cut fees. We cut fees on our businesses and our nonprofits, and we've kept our fees the very lowest in the country. And then what we also did is we made sure we invested in our infrastructure, computers and systems, so that we have the most sophisticated system in the entire country. It's easy to do business with the state of Colorado, with the Secretary of State's office, and I think people in Colorado deserve a government that if you call, someone will pick up the phone and answer your question. And that's what we do. Cut fees, cut regulation, improve government service. And we don't hoard cash. We keep it in the pockets of the people.
Scott, return the favor. A question for one of your opponents here.
Well, I'll be honest. I guess I'm caught flat-footed. I don't necessarily have any specific questions. I guess I do have a question for viewers, though. Are you happy with this direction the state of Colorado is going in? And do you think it's better to pay more taxes and pay more utility fees and have a harder time making a living? Or do you think we ought to be a booming economy, bursting with energy and building a bright future? I think that's the question this campaign.
You're saving us some time since we don't have a live studio audience and any pipeline directly to the voters of the states. We'll move on to Steve. Steve, a question for one of your opponents.
Yeah, and I'll ask Greg a question. Actually, 2 questions. First of all, Greg, is it true that you inject steroids into your watermelons and that's how they get to be so big? I'm just kidding, by the way. Secondly, Greg, what does the first 90 days of a Brophy governorship look like?
Well, you know, the first thing that I'll do, of course, is I'll have to lift the seat up so that I can actually see over the desk. Then I will go ahead and sign the death warrant for the heinous mass murderer. And we will get to work with my vision for Colorado, concentrating on education reform, entitlement reform, and building highways.
You guys are being so nice to one another. Mike, where do you?
Well, my question is for the Secretary of State. Mr. Secretary, your campaign recently attacked the rest of the candidates in the Colorado Springs Gazette, and you said you're not going to be interested in debating non-legitimate candidates. I think what we see, if you look at recent polling, that you and I have very similar polling numbers, notwithstanding the fact that you're a statewide office holder, presumably with better name ID than I am. But then you've decided to come to this debate when you said you weren't going to do any debates that Tancreda was not attending. So what gives?
I didn't attack the candidates, and you all are my friends. We were misquoted in the Gazette. We tried to correct that, but they refused to do it. I think everyone here is a legitimate candidate, and I'll say that for the record, and I'll continue to say that. So that was incorrect. I didn't go to the other debates because I wanted Tom to be there, and I thought it was important for all of us to see the differences. And I thought he was going to participate in this debate. I really did. And then he wasn't, and that may have been our mistake. But Ryan Kopp prevailed upon us, my campaign and me, Eli as well, to insist that we come, and I decided I would honor that commitment and be here today.
We're glad that all of you are here. We wish Tom was here as well. Pula, we'll move on to your next question.
Okay, this question is for everyone. What is your position on abortion? And if you are pro-life, do you believe that there are exceptions? And let's start with Greg.
Well, thanks for asking. I am pro-life, and I'm very proud of that. And I think this election, though, will be about who can get our economy back on track and who can bring our state back together. And concentrating on social issues like this really doesn't bring our state back together.
Scott?
I am pro-life. You know, when it comes to exceptions, I tell you, my mom, she had a very difficult pregnancy with my younger sister, and she almost died from that. And she was encouraged to have an abortion, and she didn't. She chose life, and those are tough decisions, and I respect that. But I agree with Greg here that what we need to focus on is, you know, building a pro-life culture and identifying areas where we can have a pro-life government. We have a governor who values the life of a convicted murderer more than expectant mother or a baby.
Steve?
First of all, I am pro-life, and I cannot imagine what it's like to be a woman who has to make a decision for an abortion. I do believe that there should be a couple of exceptions. One is the life of the mother. I personally witnessed a mother who was dying when I was in a hospital. The fetus was no longer viable, and they had to make that decision, and they, in that case, saved the life of the mother. I think it's really, really important. I think there's some room very early, maybe under 12 weeks, for rape and incest exceptions as well. Again, I think it's a really tough decision, and as a man, I don't have any idea what it's like to be a woman in that situation.
Mike?
I grew up as a Christian. I continue to practice that faith. I've always had a high view of life. And I do believe that life should be defended at all ages and stages. But we've got this great cultural divide around this issue. And we all know it. And it causes really a lot of turmoil in our society. For my part, I can envision a day when everybody rallies around the idea that abortions should not just be rare, as Planned Parenthood would say, but almost non-existent. If a woman's life is in jeopardy, of course, we need to consider that. But where I really come from is I believe in defending life at all ages and stages.
I know that as a political issue, this may be something that you find divisive, don't want to focus on. But if you're elected governor, you may have to deal with this issue. This is an issue that increasingly is playing out in state capitals across the country at the state level. In Texas, for example, there's a new law that requires all physicians who perform abortions to have admitting privileges to hospitals within 30 miles of their clinics. And that's caused a lot of clinics there to shut down. That's been the net effect. If that bill came across your desk, if you're governor, would you sign it? Greg?
Yes. We should have health and safety standards for abortion clinics. I would sign that bill.
Scott?
I don't know the specifics of the bill, but I do know this, that we need to make sure that, you know, if there are abortions today and that it's legal, that women are protected, and they, you know, when it's a medical procedure that can be dangerous, people are licensed and that they have the backup necessary. So I don't know that specific bill, but I do know that we need to do a better job of making sure that there's medical protections for women who do undergo that.
Steve?
I would have signed the bill because I also believe that let's not put one life away through the process of abortion and risk the other one because we're not in sterile, safe environments. Hopefully, abortion clinics outside of Texas, if they're going to exist, are managing themselves that way anyway, but I think it's absolutely incumbent upon us to make sure that we have at least the level of safety and process that goes on in a surgical center when you're going to have an abortion, because it is a surgical procedure, and I don't want two people to end up having their life in jeopardy or gone in the process.
You know, I've always maintained a pretty clear stance on this issue. I believe that women who are going through something so difficult and traumatic really ought to be given all the facts about it in just an even-handed, open way. If we can get there as a state, then it's certainly something that I would consider. It's not on my agenda. You're asking a hypothetical question, which I'm not going to take, but I will tell you this. I have a pretty clear track record on the matter, and I think it's important for everybody to rally around a culture of life here in the state.
Let's stay with you and go back down the line the other way on this one. Do you support the rights of gay and lesbian couples to be legally married?
I am for traditional marriage, always have been.
Steve?
I support the amendment to the Constitution, Amendment 43 in Colorado, for the definition of marriage. The Civil Unions Bill covered the rest of it, so I don't have any opposition to where we stand today in Colorado.
Scott?
Colorado defines law defines marriage between a man and a woman, and I support that, and I'll continue to support Colorado laws.
Greg?
You know, I don't think the government has any business messing around with marriage. It's an institution that existed even before the formation of this great country, and government should stay out of it.
Is the Republican Party's position on these social issues affecting their ability to connect with women? And do you think that younger women and younger voters have a broader view of social issues than the Republican Party? And we'll start with Greg.
Well, I think that the polling tells us that young people are overwhelmingly pro-life. And I think that's because they've grown up with pictures of their little brother and little sister's sonogram on the refrigerator, and Facebook is even advancing that further. I think most of them are socially in line with the same-sex marriage movement. I understand that, and I think what we need to do as Republicans is engage people in a live and let live manner, protecting liberty and concentrating on the core functions of government. That will earn the support that we need.
Scott?
I'm not here to answer for national Republicans or for even Republican decisions that were taken in the past. What I'm here, though, to say is that, you know, as a Republican Party going forward, I think what we need to do is certainly a better job of talking to people on very practical levels, on a very practical level, about how we make this a better and more just and more free society. And we've not done a good job of that. So social issues are part of those failures, but we need to do a better job of reaching out.
I think the simple answer from a guy that's not a politician is, and I've watched this issue and been a Republican my whole life, is we don't listen enough. I think we get attacked for having a war on women. We don't think it's true, so we attack back. I think the reality of it is we've got to invest more time talking to women about what's important to them. I don't think most of them list birth control at the top of their list, but I'm not a woman. I just don't think that's it. I think they want safety for their children. They want economic viability so that they can make choices at home. And I think those issues are more important, but we definitely need to listen more.
I've spent a lot of time on the road, as my colleagues at the podium have, and I can tell you one thing. The people that are most interested in talking about these divisive social issues or tough social issues are reporters. The Republicans that I talk to out there across the state, this is not an embellishment, are probably 1 in 25 or 30 questions have to do with these issues. I'm happy to share my view of it. But people are pretty focused right now on reestablishing freedom and reinvigorating job growth here in the state, defending their Second Amendment, taking our state back from the federal government's incursions. That's where we ought to be headed. That's where I'm going to head if I'm fortunate to be elected as governor.
Not a yes-no question exactly, but a short one. Describe your leadership style in 1 or 2 words. Let's start with Steve.
Inclusive and decisive.
Greg.
Thoughtful and decisive.
Scott.
Bold and principled.
Mike.
Empowerment.
1 word, all right. Pula, do you have another short one?
What word comes to mind when you would describe Governor Hickenlooper's leadership style in his governorship?
Weak.
That's my word, too. I first say what style, but it's weak.
I would say he's managerial, not leader.
SpongeBob SquarePants.
Let's switch gears for just a minute. Greg, you are the only candidate here who voted. Not all of you were in the legislature for this, so this doesn't apply to everybody. But Greg, you voted for the asset bill. That's in-state tuition for undocumented students. Tell us why you believe that was the right vote.
Well, the federal government has failed us with regard to immigration policy. They need to secure the border and put in place a visa system that works. But in the meantime, we have a bunch of kids who have grown up here and they're staying here. And if you believe that education is the path to prosperity, a path away from poverty, like I do, and you recognize that the kids that have gone to school with your kids are staying in your community, I think you would want them to avail themselves of a higher education so that they can lift themselves up out of poverty, just like you want your kids to do so. You know, I was the first person in my family to go to college, and I know that changes everything for everyone. I want them to be the first person in their family to go to college and change the future.
Pula.
Mitt Romney won just 1 of 4 Hispanic voters in Colorado in 2012. Don't Republicans need to make overtures to the fast-growing block of voters that are Hispanic if the party wants to remain competitive? And let's start with Scott.
I think the answer is absolutely yes. You know, before I became Secretary of State, I actually brought a lawsuit on behalf of Hispanic voters and candidates under the Voting Rights Act to help them defend their rights. And as Secretary of State, we've reached out. We've done voter registration in both English and Spanish, and we've also worked to help people understand better how to start a business and succeed in this state. So the answer is absolutely yes. And the way you do that, I think in a lot of ways, is you treat our Hispanic community the same way everyone else, with respect and service.
Steve.
You know, the Hispanic community is not all that different than we are in what they want. We've spent a lot of time sitting down with Hispanics, talking about schools, talking about how they get their kids educated. I mean, one of the real tragedies in Adams County is we have a Hispanic male graduation rate that runs around 60%. And there's some problems associated with why that's the case, including we not being flexible in how we provide education for their family structure. It's a real bad thing when someone doesn't graduate from high school. But we got to listen to them. We got to go out and spend some time with them and understand their issues. Even if we think they're not going to vote for us, we still need to go there.
Mike.
Well, it is critical that we, excuse me, that we do this listening. Most people, period, just human nature, people want to feel like they are listened to. And here's my message. I don't care what you look like or where you come from. I care what you're about. I care what you want to do in our great country. We should be all about creating opportunities for people to come here legally. We should fix our broken system. It should start with the border, but we should also always, as Republicans especially, hold out the vision that America is a shining city on a hill. We want your industry. We want your effort. Do it within the context of our laws. We appreciate that.
And Greg, I'm going to let you get to this a little bit, but we want to sort of reframe the question and let everybody take another stab at this. Conversation's kind of been leading to this. If you're elected governor, obviously, you're the de facto leader of the Republican Party in the state. And this is a party that hasn't won a big statewide race, a governor or Senate race, in the last decade. So how do you help this party get back on track, reverse its fortunes a bit? And what do Republican candidates and office holders really need to do to change the trend? We'll start with you, Greg.
Thank you. Well, you know, I said I want to be a governor for all of Colorado, which means I am reaching out to everybody in Colorado with the same message, though. It's a message about opportunity. It's a message about education and reforming our education, because I believe that everybody, it doesn't matter what your gender is or what your race is, you care about your kids and their future and the education that they have. We have a unique opportunity right now to win an election. The tide is going our way, but only if we nominate someone who can appeal to the unaffiliated voters in Colorado while still holding the base together.
Scott.
I think what Republicans need to do in the future, what I would do, is articulate a clear set of principles and then go out and act according to those clear set of principles and be willing to endure whatever criticism there is, but at the same time explain and show the practical benefits from principles that work. And that's what I've done as Secretary of State, both when I ran for office and won, and since I've been in office, shown practical improvements, and you keep your promises.
Steve.
Once I'm governor, obviously I'm going to govern in a very principled, conservative way, but I believe we have to prepare the next generation to govern after us. And one of the things I really want to do, and we've talked to a bunch of people that are categorized as Gen X or millennial, and we've suggested that we bring them into cabinet level, not at the top of cabinets, but working in the different cabinets in the government to get experience in agriculture, education, healthcare, energy. We need to start beginning to train the next generation to govern, because once I've done with my time as governor, I want to go back and live in a cabin and enjoy my grandchildren, and I want that generation to be ready. And I think we need to train them to be ready as part of our conservative strategy.
And Mike.
There's a great leadership quote, and it says that in the absence of great dreams, pettiness prevails. We've got to be a party that reclaims its soul and says we do have great dreams. We know that our ideas work. We know that if we put more money in the private sector because government costs less, you get to make the most of your own life. You don't have the government telling you what you can do with your life. We know when we get rid of bad rules and regulations that you have more opportunity, more freedom to do the things that you want to do. What will happen to encourage younger leaders is they'll see that our policies work. They lift people out of poverty and they create opportunity for everybody.
Thank you.
Okay, tell us why you think you can win, not just the primary, but the actual general election, what you can do to defeat Governor Hickenlooper and what your strategy is. And let's start with Scott.
In 40 seconds. I have won. I have won a statewide race. And I didn't win just by a little bit. I won by a lot. And I won that by articulating clear principles. And while in office, I've carried through on those principles. And I think one of the things that people want the most is someone who's got a sense of vision and a sense of leadership. And I think more than anyone else, I stack up very well against our current governor. He's shown no leadership. He's shown no vision. But while I've been in office as Secretary of State, I've taken that office, I've turned it from a sleepy administrative backwater, and I've turned it into a dynamic, customer-oriented organization that protects, that helps people get their start in life and business and helps people vote.
Steve?
I believe if you look at polls, you don't even have to look at polls. Go talk to your neighbor, and you're going to find out people are going to say, I don't like politicians. They've been kicking the can down the road for a while. Our problems are getting worse. There are 7 states in this country, places like North Dakota, Indiana, Massachusetts, Florida, and Michigan especially, which is where I grew up. Those states have hired people who weren't politicians, who were more business leaders. I think when it comes down to the ballot in the 24th of June and November, even though Governor Hickenlooper might originally have been a business leader, we've seen that he's a lot more politician today than he's ever been. I think people are going to choose something different. Because if you don't choose something different in November, you might as well expect the same result you're getting today. And I think that's going to show in my experience, my background. Healthcare is the issue of today. That's where my strength is. And I think they'll make that choice.
Mike?
Well, this election will come down to a choice. It won't come down to a referendum. You got to go out as the candidate and make the choice. You got to make people focus on the choice that you'd like them to make for you. The governor has tried to raise your taxes by $1 billion. He's come in and made it harder to practice constitutionally protected gun ownership. He's made our energy bills higher, waged a war against rural parts of the state. He punted, and it was a shanked punt on Nathan Dunlap, and it was a disastrous decision. Then he signs the election fraud bill into law, among other horrible bills. When I go around the state, I ask people, tell me one agenda item that the governor has put before the people of the state and led to, I'll buy you a steak dinner. The room always goes silent.
Greg?
Thank you. Well, I'm first going to hold the base together because they know they can trust me. And then I'm going to appeal to the unaffiliated voters as the experienced candidate, the guy who has experience running my own small business and fighting for the issues that matter to regular Coloradans. And then I'm going to appeal to them just as that, a regular Coloradan, not your typical Republican. That bicycle riding, Prius driving farmer will be the next governor of Colorado.
I've heard that before, but it makes me smile every time I hear that. I just picture you on your bike. Let's see. We have one more question. This is an important question to another one of our sponsors, Mr. Ryan Call and the state party. Will you actually campaign for whoever wins the nomination? If it's not you, if it's not somebody on this stage even, no matter who it is, will you support and campaign for the Republican nominee for governor? Greg?
Absolutely.
All right. He's going to hold you to that. Scott?
The answer is yes, of course. I'll support whoever there is, and whatever they ask, I'll help out.
I will also support whoever it is because you know what? I got in this race because I believe that a conservative has to win in 2014 for my children and my grandchildren to have what they have. So as much as I want Colorado to thrive in the next world, I'm a little bit selfish. I'd actually like my own family to benefit from conservative principles. I will support whoever it is because we must win in 2014.
Our state needs fundamental change, so I'll be part of ushering in change, whether I'm at the front of the pack or another. I would point out that former Congressman Tancredo in debates was not clear as to whether when he was running for the presidency, he was not clear as to whether he would support the Republican nominee for president. And I hope that somebody in the media will ask him that question.
Thank you.
We've reached the end of our debate, and it's time for the candidates to give their closing statements. And thanks to all 4 of you for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks to all of you. You'll have 90 seconds to give the closing statement. We've determined that. We've determined the order ahead of time. We drew some numbers backstage. And so 90 seconds to sum up why you're the right guy for the nomination, the right guy to take on Governor Hickenlooper this fall. And we are going to start with Steve House.
Thank you. My fellow Coloradans, I think it's time for us to have a new conversation. I think we need to stop talking about failures in the past. We need to stop talking about politicians who fought battles and lost, and we need to stop talking about the things that make us angry. What we need to talk about is what we can do together to make Colorado a better place for all of us. As I've gone out on the campaign trail, I've met with many of you, and what you're telling me is, like me, that you want freedom and the Second Amendment rights that you had back. I agree with that. I also think what you want and what you've been telling me is that you don't want to worry about a job when you wake up in the morning. You want to know that you can dream about new opportunities for yourself and your children. And some of you have even said that you want to feel like a new day is dawning here in Colorado. Well, for that new day to dawn, I think we have to have a leadership position in energy. I think we've got to provide 250,000 jobs through our private sector and economic development process. I think we have to have competitive schools and be able to provide individualized education to our children. I also think that we have to be able to trust our government, and it has to trust us. And lastly, I believe that we've got to be able to count on our health care and when and where we need our health care, not just when the government says. My grandfather told me growing up many times, set your eyes on goals as lofty as the heavens, and the worst thing that's going to happen to you is you're going to exceed your expectations. You can find me at houseforgovernor.com. We're ready to do the job. I appreciate your support. Thank you.
Steve, thank you. Secretary of State Gessler, you're up.
Thank you. So I came here about 17 years ago for the same reason that everyone here came, or everyone's family came, and that is to lead a better life. And in Colorado, the thing I love about Colorado is it doesn't matter what schools you went to, and it doesn't matter where you grew up, and it doesn't matter who your mom or your dad was. What matters is where you're headed in life. What matters is if you're going to work hard, persevere, and build a better future. But I think we're losing that here in Colorado. We have a governor who doesn't lead, who has no vision. His first initiative was to be determined, and he's defaulted to the normal tax and spend, higher regulatory way of governing. I'm grateful I've had the chance to live the American dream. And I want my kids to live the American dream. And I want all Coloradans to live the American dream. And as we look back on past generations, we've inherited this wonderful life of freedom and opportunity. I don't want to lose that. And I want to make sure that everyone, every Coloradan, every family, has the opportunity to lead that type of life. So I think what I want to do is stand firm and lead this state into a renewed era of prosperity and a better future.
Scott, thank you. Mike Kopp.
Well, thank you for having me today, this morning, and thank you, voters, for watching us this morning. What I'd like you to know about me mostly is that I got very lucky in life, and I married an amazing woman, Shannon, and together we're raising 4 kids in Golden, except for one is off in Mesa University right now. I got my start in public service, jumping out of perfectly good airplanes, mostly in the dead of night for the 82nd Airborne Division. I like to say that I worked for Ronald Reagan, though not quite directly. During that experience, I had the opportunity to serve in combat in the Gulf War. I became a Ranger. From there, I went on into firefighting, and I fought fires on a number of crews around the West, including becoming a hotshot firefighter. I went into ministry work, Christian ministry work, and I became a pastor, where I served for about 7 years as a pastor. Then I went into work developing leadership as a consultant in Christian ministry. I became the minority leader in the state Senate, where I championed the fight for conservative reform, and we need to continue that fight. Everything rises and falls on leadership. And nothing in my mind and in my very heart and soul emblemizes that more than those Rangers at Pointe du Hoc in World War II, at Normandy. Everybody was scrambling. Who will take the cliff? And the Rangers said, Rangers lead the way. Everything rises and falls on leadership. Our governor has not led us well. He's not. And the people know that they've been let down. We can make more out of the state than we have. Our future can be brighter than it has been. I ask for your support. My name is Mike Kopp. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. And finally, State Senator Greg Brophy.
Well, if you're ready for a governor for all of Colorado, one who is an experienced leader fighting for the things that matter to you, who also brings the experience of running his own small business, mine happens to be a farm, then I would ask you to join our team. You want someone with a vision for Colorado, for education reform and for transportation and public safety, who has the tenacity of a state champion wrestler, who can hit the ground running on day one, then I'd have you join our team. I'm at greg4governor.com. And to the Republican electorate out there, this is our chance. We get to chart a new course. Are we going to be a new party with new faces and fresh ideas, a grand opportunity party for the future of Colorado and America? Or are we going to go back to the past, things that didn't work previously? I hope we choose right. Join our team, greg4governor.com. I'd love to have your support.
Thanks to all of you. Did you guys have fun?
Absolutely.
It's
been great.
Live TV, not so bad?
Not too bad.
Any questions for Poola or I? Just kidding. We don't want to open that can.
Wait a minute. Hold on. It's our turn.
Thank you very much. That wraps up our GOP gubernatorial debate here, a live 90-minute roundtable with all these candidates, the top 5 candidates for governor on a lot of the issues of the day. Really appreciate all of you being here, and really appreciate the Colorado Republican Party as well for helping us put this together. We regret that Tom Tancredo, the only other of those 5 candidates who was not able to be with us today, but hopefully we will get a chance to speak with Tom and bring him in and talk more about his thoughts on the issues as we go forward. Thanks to all of you as well for watching at home. Remember, if you are a registered Republican, you can attend your party caucus this coming Tuesday night to talk about the race with your friends and neighbors, to let other Republicans know who you support, and it'll be the first gauge for our candidates as well as to where you guys stand heading into the State Assembly in April. Is that right? You guys all going to caucus? Excited?
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
Ready to go?
God. Bring it up a little. I thought you guys were caffeinated this morning. We wore them out. Also, a big thanks to Poola Davis and the Colorado Springs Gazette. Thank you for being here as a co-moderator. And thanks to the Gazette for all of its help and assistance in getting this together. And, of course, streaming the debate live on Gazette.com. On behalf of Poola, our partners at the Gazette, our partners with the Colorado Republican Party, and for everyone here at Fox 31 Denver, I'm Eli Stokels. Thanks so much for watching. Have a great day.